Oh, welcome, folks, to this Riverscape Consortium webinar on accelerating post-fire Riverscape restoration. My name's Joe Wheaton. I'm a professor of Riverscapes at Utah State University. And I'll introduce here Alex and Nicole. Nicole, many of you have been getting emails from. She's our Chief Communications Officer. And Alex is restoration coordinator and practitioner with Ann Branch Solutions and was recently a graduate student here at Utah State. Nicole, you want to say hello?
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us here today. My name is Nicole. I work in communications with Riverscapes Consortium. Thank you all for your patience while I email you. And excited to hear what Joe and Alex have to educate us on today.
Alex, would you introduce yourself as a failed physics major, or how would you describe yourself?
Failed biochem major, I guess.
Oh, that's right. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I did some geomorphic research with under Joe's lab at Utah State University, and now I'm more engaged in doing a lot of restoration projects in the Pacific Northwest. I'm based in Cle Elum, and just my last view at the SNOTEL map for my region was 35 to 40% of the median snowpack, so it seems like a pretty relevant time to be talking about post-fire restoration and getting these thoughts out first before everything starts burning up.
Yeah, so what we're going to do is tag team a little presentation. And like Alex said, we're definitely primed for a big fire year. And what we're hoping is those of you here will remember when your riverscapes or your watershed burns, maybe a few little ideas from here. And one is we don't have to throw up our hands in despair. We can actually do something, and it may actually be a great opportunity for accelerating riverscape restoration. So this little picture here from Suzanne Husky, she's done some amazing visuals of looking at LTBR. This is inspired by some of Kevin Swift's work, and I think there's probably some Swifties on the call in this sort of post-fire restoration that we're talking about here. So for us, this, or at least for me, going back to the a fire in Idaho, Sharps Fire in Baugh Creek, I took this photo and sort of noticed this real obvious contrast between, all the riparian areas that burnt to the ground versus these areas where beaver activity was and wetting up those riverscapes, and tweeted something to the effect of turns out water doesn't burn. And as obvious as this is and as exciting as it is, and there's a bunch of research on this isn't what we're going to talk about today. We're going to instead talk about not what we can do on the preventative side, but what we do after the fact. And so shout out for sure to Emily Fairfax and others who are doing such a good job at both promoting the ideas, maybe a Pixar film you've seen recently, as well as doing the science to show how beaver impacted riverscapes can act as really important fire breaks, et cetera, et cetera. And we could hopefully compel our peers and funders, et cetera, to go do a bunch of preventative work to expand this stuff. But it turns out, as humans, we're pretty crap at doing what we need to ahead of time and beforehand. We're a lot better chasing ambulances and dealing with things afterwards. So our main point today is wildfire creates this short-lived opportunity to really accelerate riverscape restoration work that might otherwise take years to fund and or permit. And I was having too much fun with AI, so apologies for these busy slides. But this is our roadmap for today. I fed it some of our stuff, and I mean it's kind of scary the things that it can come up with. But anyway, the water that would go to fighting fires is all going to the data centers to make these stupid figures. But what we're going to do, we're going to talk about why post-fire window matters, how important this is, and really what's this opportunity that we think you can seize. And Alex is going to provide a bunch of real grounded examples of, what does this look like? What has this looked like? Post-fire, low-tech process-based restoration. I'm going to talk a little bit about how quickly we can turn things around. We've got, lots of nationally available data sets, lots of tools to accelerate this stuff. We don't have to just get mired down in analysis paralysis. And then, unfortunately, Nicole in the advertisement or whatever for this said, we'd provide you with a playbook. So now we've got to give you a playbook at the end of this to summarize it. So that's where we're going. And really, we do want to emphasize this argument that the window is short following post-fire. There is still longer-term recovery work that can be done, but taking actions really in that first 1 to 6 months is really, really important. Also, that while we are going to continue to see lots of these fires and they are inevitable, the recovery of these riverscapes is not necessarily inevitable following these things, and we'll show you what we mean by that. So some of you may be familiar with Clear and Thorn, this sort of channel evolution model that is expanded from Shum and sort of basically gets us to think about when we have incised systems and what we can do to sort of kick off lateral activity, sort of the widening phase, and then an aggradation phase, and then getting into potentially healthier looking riverscapes. This has driven a lot of process-based restoration as well as low-tech process-based restoration. And our argument here that fire changes the rules is really based off of a couple of things. One, we're working in a lot of riverscapes that pre-fire they are degraded. Those sponges are drained out. A lot of the valley bottom is not a nice connected floodplain. So we have vegetation that's often the fuel for these fires that's kind of locking things in place. And when that vegetation burns to the ground and we get this sort of window where we're going to have higher magnitude runoff events potentially. And so we've got this bigger hydrologic engine. And that bigger hydrologic engine is really important because it has the potential to do a lot of this. We need to do this widening and aggradation work. And so we're going to have more flows, higher flows for at least a limited amount of time to do that. And we may also have a lot of debris. We may have sediment. We may have ash, etc. And so if what this conceptual model here is really talking about is how do we kick off within these spaces of these valley bottoms some lateral activity and then start rebuilding these valley bottoms, that's really the opportunity that we're talking about here, how we can sort of move through those stages. And so Alex is going to kind of show us some examples of what that might look like versus if we don't do anything. And the doing part of this kind of getting this work is we got to give it some tools. We got to give it a meal. And those tools are really shoving structure, shoving wood in this. Not permanent structures, but shoving structural elements that can be consumed and reworked by these systems. So the opportunity here, we can kind of break into what's the work that we can do post-fire versus the work that the system is really doing, the bigger work, right? And how those work in concert together. So the work that we do is really the low tech side of things, and that's this. It's a lot of hand work to get in and basically get material into these systems. And Alex will show us that. But the real important thing is the processes I was alluding to in the last thing. That's the P. So the low tech, this is hand built stuff. It tends to be relatively lower cost. It's rapidly deployable. It's scalable and it's adaptable. I say this if we pay for it, right? If we actually seize these opportunities. And so there's a lot of reasons this matters post-fire. It's accessible. The actions, these aren't permanent things. We're not trying to go in and fix and rebuild a system. We're trying to really unlock its own processes so that it can shape its own recovery. And this is scalable under emergency timelines. And the other real opportunity post-fire is permitting can be a lot easier than it often is otherwise. So the P in process-based restoration, the key processes are going to be wood accumulation and beaver dam activity and root mat production over the long term. But in the short term, these are accelerating hydrologic and hydraulic and geomorphic processes that rework these valley bottoms in a post-fire sense. And these are just some text messages from a colleague at the Forest Service in Nevada after a fire in 2019, where she got out and was able to, shove some structures in. And I love some of these comments, like have some gap teeth after the main part of the flooding this past month. Everything's mainly functioning, but yeah, some of the structures moved. They adjusted, they blew out, they whatever. But also was capturing sediment, was doing some work. And so you can give the system some tools to play with. See what happens. And there's often an accelerated sort of kickoff of processes then, and then feed more as things are settling down and vegetation is taking hold. So on the preventative versus the post-fire work, yeah, on the preventative, folks don't necessarily always feel, the urgency. Whereas after a fire, folks, often it's a knee-jerk reaction to put things back like it was. Well, in a lot of our riverscapes, we don't want to put it back like it was because a lot of them are in a degraded condition. But that is a time when people are more willing to consider different things. Post-fire, there's also sometimes emergency funding things like burned area emergency response through Forest Service BLM. There's emergency watershed protection through NRCS. There's other programs, and we've got a guy in office who likes to throw paper towels out after big things. So let's get in line to do the stuff that grabs headlines on these things. I don't think it's beneath us as an industry to do a little ambulance chasing for the greater good of making healthier riverscapes here. I would love it if we were talking about just doing preventative work, but the reality is we don't raise the sort of funds or make this stuff happen quite as quickly. So yes, I would love to tell you that these principles of riverscape health that we've laid out are compelling people to action, et cetera, et cetera. They are to a certain extent, but nothing like what's possible in an emergency setting. I won't say where this is or what this is, but please don't do this. Okay. This is emergency work done post-fire. In this case, this is downstream of a fire, and it's like, basically the actions are get rid of wood because, if wood is there, it's going to, clog up things. Well, the more you get rid of it, you'll never get rid of all of it. And it just lubricates it. And it's probably more likely to go cause problems. And then putting in things like this, these little, rebuilt channels, it's just, these are pipe dreams. So what we're talking about is not rebuilding. What we're talking about is kicking off natural processes, truly doing process-based restoration. So I'm going to let Alex take over on some slides, and he'll show some real examples.
Thanks, Joe. Let me just get over to my PowerPoint here. So yeah, as Joe was saying, we have all of these processes kicked off by wildfire, the increase in runoff and sediment, and all of that is going to drive an immense amount of work in that 1 to 6 month period, and still waning for the next couple of years, but really heightened right after the wildfire. But one thing that isn't really mentioned in this graphic that I think is really important, especially in woodland systems, is the lack of tree recruitment after a wildfire. So we have all of these burned forests, and the way trees fall down is susceptible to fluvial processes like root undermining and flooding of the floodplain. But in a lot of systems, we don't actually get the trees down into the river naturally in that time that the geomorphic window is happening after the wildfire. And so I'm going to flip to a couple different sites that we've had in a long-term watershed experiment that we've been studying for over 15 years that had a wildfire erupted in 2021. So this is a unique example where we have a huge baseline of pre-data and pre-restoration prior to the fire. And a lot of the wood that we see here was added through low-tech means, and we can see all these trees on the right bank, left side of the video here, not falling in. This is 5 years later, but we get a lot more floodplain exchange when we start to give the river a lot more food. Still, there's a lot of floodplain left inactivated, but essentially the more we give these systems food in the terms of large wood and key pieces, the more lateral exchange that we're getting. And to contrast that, I just want to show a video of what typical controls look like in this same system in the same time frame. And this, to me, really defines the difference between resilience and resistance. This is a degraded, incised, and planar channel. All these trees are burnt, dead, but not falling in. Some are falling in, but are bridging the creek and not active in any fluvial processes. So despite the wildfire kicking off all these processes, we see a lot of these degraded streams remaining degraded and for years, and really missing that window that work could be done. So I hope that kind of gives some backdrop of why we're trying to push some of this process-based restoration in degraded streams and do it fast so we can capture that window. So as Joe already kind of went over, the low-tech process-based restoration is one of the more scalable ways that we can apply and add structure to these streams at a vast scale and in a more cost-effective manner than reworking the whole valley bottom, like one of his last slides there. And I won't go too deep into the mechanics of low-tech process-based restoration. There's a whole manual that you can read about that. And all of those lessons apply. Here's the typical beaver dam analogs that we see nowadays with the wicker weaves and BDAs. And they all apply, but I think it's important, or one metaphor to remember is that you have to know the rules to break the rules. And so when are some of these structures appropriate, and what are the overall goals that you're trying to get, and how can we break the rules to do better work? So in wildfire settings, I think just to address some of the processes that Joe's talked about with beaver, there's going to be so much sediment and flow coming down in a flood right after a wildfire that building the perfect BDA like that modern BDA with the nice mattress that we've really pushed in perennial systems may not be applicable because things get rattled up so fast. And the wicker weave is so much faster. You can use a lot of dead brush. These are both from rangeland systems from Washington and Idaho. A ton of fine sediment getting deposited, much easier to construct, much more appropriate. And in woodland systems, just getting these key pieces, a highly trained crew that can direct fell or grip hoist and use low-tech rigging means can add a lot of volume of wood fast. And so this is at the top of a treatment area where the next log jam is about 600 meters above. And so we just get a ton of debris. And that debris, wood accumulation, starts to really pile up and drive the processes that we want to see. Wood recruitment, aggradation, these trees that are falling in on the right-hand side over here is from the channel lifting up and spreading flow over a greater extent and starting to recruit trees naturally, starting to get a return on investment there. And overall, we can start to fill some of these incised channels with nice gravels in the Pacific Northwest, great gravels for spawning. And in this picture, although it looks pretty gnarly, all the flow has been pushed out onto the floodplain where there's a ton of cover, more lentic habitat than lotic. So, and to know the rules, you got to be able to break them. And one thing that I think is missing in the low-tech world is an acknowledgement that we can actually play with bigger toys and send people out with backpacks as well. So we can add pieces of wood that in traditional restoration, you might need to employ a large excavator or a helicopter. We'll turn off that chainsaw noise. We all know what that sounds like. But dropping a pretty large tree into the river. Similarly, we can use these low-tech rigging to hand recruit root wads. These are high value pieces. So acquiring really high value large wood from the floodplain in a burned area is much easier when the trees are burned, and we can still do that with rigging means. Here's a 1-ton winch on an 8-to-1, so we can pull trees over 2 feet in diameter down into the river corridor and post-fire areas. All of this equipment is typically less than 30 pounds total, so we can apply basic mechanical advantage to do a lot of work. And as I mentioned, these are kinds of pieces that only excavators and helicopters would be able to move. So trying to scale up is still achievable with low-tech means. But as I mentioned, time is of the essence, and I just want to mention this is a video 2 years after a wildfire in Washington. We're gonna drop this tree here over the channel with the goal of accumulating a ton of wood. So as we fall it, one thing I want to highlight here, boom, nice. Got a long piece spanning the channel onto the floodplain, ready to rack onto some of the stable elements on the floodplain and accumulate a ton of wood. Now, here's 4 years after a wildfire. That same video I showed you earlier. We're going to take a closer look at what happens with this wood over time and why getting in here faster might be more advantageous in terms of the restoration effectiveness. So as we start to fall this tree, similar size, similar setting and everything, just a little bit more time, we get a little more shattering. And so this is true with natural wood recruitment over time. And so it's just best to get in there fast and quick after the wildfire. We can be a lot more effective. Let's see if I can get to the next video here. Here's in the bootleg fire, the largest fire in Oregon in 2021. Essentially, we can see basically every single tree here has been burnt to a crisp. And this is, I think, 3 years after the wildfire. We don't really see any wood in this creek, a tributary to the North Fork Sprague. So if we can have a highly trained crew that can move quick, agilely, and with minimal access, we can actually change the playbook here and give the river a lot more tools. Start to get in a lot more key pieces. This is what's going to prepare this kind of stream for better habitat for incoming salmon. So team like this can, roughly run through 1.5 miles of stream in an 8-day stint. And so pretty fast and effective way to roll through these areas. Here's one from my colleague in Oregon, Gus. It doesn't look like it's going to play. Well, that one's not playing. But essentially, trying to partner with beaver is a much more difficult thing when the whole valley floor is burnt up. But the more we can energize the floodplain with large wood, fast treatments, and getting things going right after that wildfire to capture sediment and reverse incision and cycles, the faster we can support the vegetation and food and building materials that beaver need. And then they're going to start doing the work for you and kick things into high gear. But with that, I have a lot more to talk about with implementation, but I'd like to pass it back to Joe so you can talk a little bit more about some of the tools that we can use to plan accordingly.
Great. Yeah, and so there's some questions coming through in the chat. Nicole, did you want to?
Oh, you can go for it.
Yeah, I think a few of them that are easy we'll pick off as we're going here, and then the others will sort of pile up for the end, and so we can have a good Q&A session there at the end. So let me go back to sharing my screen here. You guys able to see that again? Um, so, uh, so we've tried to make the case that post fire window matters. Like Alex's real cool examples of that tree shattering into a million pieces versus kind of staying intact. We let things go for too long. It's different. We've knocked off the hydrologic peaks. We've got these the structure that is potentially available there is not necessarily the same. Obviously, it's going to vary with burn severity, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this short-term sort of opportunity here where accelerated potentially funding, streamlined permitting, getting crews out quickly in a responsive fashion to really take advantage of these opportunities that align. And then, you can get into the more sort of medium to long-term sort of recovery work, and there's some questions about adaptive management. One of the things that we see a lot is I mentioned the phrase before, but analysis paralysis, and so I want to just draw your attention to this. Okay, when we are dealing with an emergency, the key word is emergency, and we don't need to, write another dissertation on this. There's been a lot of really interesting science and work that goes on in terms of studying post-fire responses, et cetera, and some of the underlying science that supports the sort of cases that we're making here. But what do we do? And it's very easy to just get wrapped around the axle in details. And so what I want to attempt to do here before we open up to questions is walk you through a demo. And there are lots of ways to do this, but one of the things in the Riverscape consortium that we've tried to do, and a lot of this has been with support from especially the Bureau of Land Management. They've been the biggest supporter, NRCS, Forest Service, NOAA Fisheries, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, et cetera. But really BLM has been the big, sort of driving force behind this, is make some tools that make it a lot easier to do this sort of work. Okay. And so let's look at, sort of rapid triage, doing stuff that's going to be sort of low regret. I mean, in a lot of these cases after they've burned, just throwing a bunch of material in these systems and giving it some tools to work with is not going to be a big deal. Who cares if it moves around and adjusts? That's what we're trying to get it to do. And this does sort of set us up nicely then for adapting and seeing what happens. I mean, maybe you're followed up by a drought. Maybe you're followed up by a 100-year flow event. You just don't know. And you can iterate on these things. The way that we do this, Riverscape Consortium, one of the things that we've been focused on, we've produced, there's a lot of models, but then we have these applications for trying to, solve some of these problems about, all really centered around how do we improve riverscape health. And so this kind of vision of healthy riverscapes for all. And so those of you that even found about this webinar, thank you, Nicole. That's through the community platform, and that's really about connecting people and not having to reinvent wheels and share what each other are learning and et cetera, et cetera. But then we also have a data exchange, and the data exchange is where you can contribute models or you can also contribute your monitoring data through something we call Riverscape Studio and get it up into the data exchange. And we have a lot of model outputs that we can also leverage here. So there are, if you think about process-based restoration, you might have a screening and prioritization phase, planning, implementation, as-built monitoring. And what we're talking about is let's compress this, not from something that takes, months to years, to get ready to finally say, okay, let's go build something, but let's compress this to something that can be done in days to weeks, so that we can get out there in a week to month. And there's different spatial scales. You might look at your burn over the entire watershed, and then you might prioritize and find these different reaches that make sense to work in. And there's data that you can leverage from the data exchange and shove into viewers in GIS. And what I'm going to show you is a little demo in Curious and the data exchange, grabbing some of that. And this is not to make you feel like you are at all proficient in this. We've got tons of online tutorials. We have trainings. We have classes you can take if you're interested. But this is really just to remove the excuse that this stuff has to take a long time through a quick demo here. Things you're going to need for a permit application, vicinity maps and, what is it that we're proposing to do where, et cetera, et cetera. What we're trying to do in Riverscape Studio, again, not the only way, but we're trying to streamline the ease at which you can produce these sorts of things. And then, be able to say, hey, what are the existing conditions? In this case, we're showing, a handful of reaches. And these reaches, this actually work from Alden Shawcross, are basically breaking up this valley bottom. And what you're seeing in green and blue, that's the active channel and active floodplain. What you're seeing in this sort of beige color for the rest of the valley bottom, that's the inactive stuff. So what's the opportunity here with this post-fire? The opportunity is, can we get more green and blue by shoving a bunch of stuff in post-fire, taking advantage of a bigger hydrologic engine and trying to expand out that green and blue? And, and we can get down to the point, and we're going to do this in a second, of specifying roughly what am I going to do where. Okay. And I do mean roughly, because roughly is all you need for a permit application. This stuff is not precise. And so another horrible AI image here, way too busy of a little infographic, but something, for you later. But basically with Riverscape Studio, this is a free plugin into the free QGIS software. And you can ingest and bring in aspects of models that we have in the data exchange, and then zoom in and then start to lay out some stuff. So let's do that right now. So I'm going to get out of there for a second. So this is QGIS, and the demo that I'm going to do right now, I'm just going to add some base maps just so we have something to look at. So terrain, I'm going to take us to that bootleg fire that we saw some imagery from Alex on, is up in the Upper Klamath and north of Bly here. So this was a big mega fire. What are those? Over 100,000? Is that right?
I think bootleg was like 400,000. I'll check.
400,000 acres. Yeah. So, so I've got myself in the ballpark here. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to add some imagery, and you can see, not surprising, it's still sort of a fair bit of black here. And so what I am going to do is I am just going to use this little tool that's part of the viewer, and I'm going to go and I'm going to download something from the data exchange. So I'm going to hit Browse Data Exchange projects in that map area. And so it's going to take me over here. You can have a free account, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the same part of the map I was looking on. And there's all sorts of stuff here. One of the things I might want is like, hey, what are my valley bottoms? So I'm just going to hit VBET, which is our valley bottom extraction tool. And I can come in here and I can see, oh, okay, so here's VBET models for this one area. And so this looks like the latest version. So all I'm going to do, I could open that up in the web, but I'm just going to copy that project ID. Okay. And so I can download this from here, or I could come back into Riverscape Viewer. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be lazy. I'm not even going to download this. I'm just going to copy that project ID in. And now it's going to go and it'll check my credentials. And now it's brought in just a non-downloaded, but just a web view of this particular model. And so now I've gone from nothing, okay, to something. I've got one of these models, and what is this model doing? It's pretty simple what this model is doing. It is simply trying to map out where the riverscapes are, right? So I can see, based off of this, it's got the valley bottom in here, and so I can see what is the space that I might be able to get into play? There's all sorts of models, but I just wanted to bring in one real quick there just to show you what can be done. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into, let's say, a particular reach. Actually, Alex, this is our reach, right? And so here's a reach, and let's just say that I went through a process and identified, where were the areas that burnt, and then this was an area that I wanted to work in. I could import that valley bottom layer from here and bring that in, but I'm going to make myself a blank, empty, curious project, and I'm just going to call this. I'll put it over here. And again, my intention here is not to make you proficient in anything. My intention here is to click a bunch of buttons that make you car sick, and then show you that we can get from nothing to something relatively quickly. So I'm making an empty container for my Riverscape Studio project. And so it's doing its thing here. I have this valley bottom mapped out from nationally available data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into this empty project. And first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to identify my Riverscape. I could import it from one of those other layers, but I'm just going to show you how many, there's a lot of different ways I can do this. And I'll just call this my VB. And it makes an empty layer over here. I toggle editing and I can start drawing. And I'm just going to do a very sloppy job because you know what? I got to get a permit application in quite quickly, okay? So you can edit this and do a nicer job, but there is a valley bottom, okay? Once I have that valley bottom in my project here, I could start to do some things for it. So like, okay, how much of this valley bottom are we dealing with? So, or how big is this? And so I can say the top is up here, the bottom is down here, and I can generate a center line for that valley bottom, and I can save it. So my center line, and in doing so, I can see, oh, okay, so I've got about 1.3 kilometers, and the valley itself is pretty straight. Not a lot of sinuosity here. So there's so now I'm going to have acreage of valley bottom. I'm going to have length of valley bottom. Now, if I start coming in and digitizing other things, now I have a basis for metric generation, normalization of certain metrics, etc. And what this breaks us into is we've got inputs where I can start getting some data pretty quickly. I can bring in, so let's say that from this particular guy, I decided, you know what, I actually want this. I'm going to download this project now. And I'm going to grab everything that's there. And so it's going to bring it over so that I can actually work with this. Looks like that was a 260 megabyte project that's just grabbing off that data exchange for us. And so instead of just having web mapping tile services, now it's actually got that data set downloaded locally. And I want to come back to my demo here. And so you can see my little project reach right here. So something we'll often want to do is just like have data that's relevant to our thing. And so maybe what I'm going to do right now is I want some basics on the flows. So this is, watershed from downstream project extent. And we'll let it go hit up USGS stream stats. It's going to delineate a basin for us. It's going to grab some flow statistics, et cetera. That's going to help me understand, hey, in the pre-fire realm, what might I expect in terms of runoff, and get me in sort of order of magnitude sort of bins so I can think about, what's the size of that hydrologic engine. You can see the difference between my really sloppy valley bottom I drew here and what it's got there. There's that catchment, yeah. that it's derived for that upper area. And so I could do something like I'm going to promote this to an area of interest. And I have loaded this VBET project, but maybe I just want that VBET only for my the watershed upstream of this. And so I could come into VBET and I could grab a particular output, let's just say the valley bottom, and I can add it to Curious. And so I could bring this in as a valley bottom, and then, oh, of course, in a live demo, it crashes on me. Lovely. Won't do that for you. But I can bring in some stuff. And so I can be populating inputs from existing, data sets. Or I can come in and I can start authoring some new content. And what sorts of things might you want to do? Well, you can make a low-tech process-based restoration design. And so I'm going to just hit add a new design, and I'm going to say put wood here quickly. And let's just grab a layer, and we're going to just do this real quick as structure points. And we're going to say that this is associated with my valley bottom, and this is phase 1 emergency work, and this is going to be 2026, and it's going to be in August. And I'm just doing this off of a desktop analysis. So that made me an empty container here. And what I can do to just get started, I can come back into this little reach, and now I can start saying things like, let's dump a structure in. So let's put a structure here. And what do I want? Let's do assisted log structure, or a rhino. There's other attributes here, but all I need to do is just put that in. Let's fell a tree because Alex seems to like that. And let's do, I don't know, let's do a BDA just because we can, right? And so you can start laying out a design really quickly, and then there are analyses that you can perform to summarize those things. So what I'm going to do next is just open up an existing one, and so that you can kind of see what that looks like. I'm going to close this project for now, and we'll go ahead and save those points. And then I'll do open a recent project. Oh, actually, I don't have it. So this is a good little thing where I can come here and grab a Riverscape Studio project. Within map area. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to grab this project right here with this Bailey flat, copy the project ID, and I'm going to just bring it back like we did on that other one. Download a Riverscape project. And so now I've got this project that I've just downloaded, and it has in it a whole bunch of different designs. These are as-built. So this one here, if I turn off some of these things, this one, as-built phase 1, I might have to open this one up in Curious, but give me 1 second. Not the most polished live demo here. Thank you for your patience. And a branch, Bailey flat without imagery. Here we go. Open it that way. So this is me opening it in Riverscape Studio instead of Viewer. But my point being, we've been able to take on projects like this, where we can come in and we can quickly map, what's the area that could be accessible. We can do a risk assessment, and then we can start proposing where are we going to put structures and get moving, quite quickly. And so here, this is the as-built. So these were all the structures that went in the first emergency treatment, and then it looks like these were done as lines. Those are the ones that went in a subsequent treatment. Oh wait, sorry, that was the design for the second phase. But the as-builts should be pretty close to that. And so then you can sort of, through time, be monitoring the actions, as well as doing data capture events that actually monitor conditions, and then start doing analyses that look at the effectiveness of these things. You can author your own protocols. We have lots of protocols available. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. So you should be a little bit unsatisfied with that. But hopefully enough, you got to see enough that it's like, okay, there's some software, it's free. There's some models, they're also free. There's things I can do to start tackling this kind of in an emergency sense of where, you mean, if I handed this to someone like Alex and said, hey, we need to be able to submit a permit application in 2 days, he'd be able to do it. Okay. And he'd be able to do it probably even without a site visit. He'd do a better job if he had a site visit. Those things can be good enough for getting a permit application going. You can refine the design with field visit and then get out and start actually doing work in a relatively short amount of time. And so we promised you a playbook. Okay. And really this is, move quickly, focus on the areas that are low risk, high return riverscapes. Not everywhere needs to be treated. Work where you can. Don't wait for perfect information because it's not going to just land in your lap. We are arguing that if you, in a lot of these places, we have good enough information to get going. We know what can be done and the sorts of things to do. So let's do it. And then, start that coordination right out of the gates post fire with the interested parties, and really be emphasizing and prioritizing not the process, but processes, right? So the key processes, for example, getting wood accumulation regoing in some of these systems. So there's your sort of playbook if you want, one horrible infographic to take it away. And really, this is very similar to what we describe in low-tech process-based restoration as a concluding restoration principle, which is self-sustaining, processes are the solution, right? That's what we're trying to get to a situation where you have self-sustaining natural processes in these riverscapes where they can express themselves as healthy riverscapes, giving us more resilience to fires, ironically, floods, droughts, and a greater range of ecosystem services. So this is what we kind of wanted the point to get across, and we'll open it up now to questions. And the hope here is not that you've gone away and like, yep, I know exactly what to do, or how to do all these steps. But hopefully you do have a little bit of an argument and a playbook for if this is what happens in my watershed, this is the sort of game I'm going to try and play and try and motivate partners to get these things to happen. So, Nicole, are we able to unmute people if they want to ask questions, or do we want to start working through some of the chat ones first?
Yeah, let's start working through some of the chat ones. And if anyone wants to be unmuted, you can raise your hand and we can trigger your audio that way. Looks like Jen Rogers had a good question. With the scale that post-fire restoration requires, what kind of post-implementation monitoring do you recommend? Is there a time window for adaptive management or building new structures after the initial round of building that practitioners should follow?
Great question. Favorite 2 words, it depends. Moving on. No, but it really, it does depend on, what are the, sort of what are some of the local resource concerns and objectives. And so what you monitor, it's going to be very similar to how we look at this for low-tech process-based restoration. We have some principles of Riverscape Health, but you may have indicators that you may want to look at that are beyond just Riverscape Health indicators. Maybe this is something that's driven by fish habitat, and so you're going to pay more attention to some of the sort of provision of habitat through specific in-stream and floodplain geomorphic units. So we do a training in the fall on sort of Riverscape health monitoring and how that's adapted to fire. I saw another one in the chat. Do we have a specific protocol for this yet? No. We haven't done one just specifically for fire, but we've done enough of these things you can pull together. And also Curious lets you mix and match different pieces from different protocols. And so you can kind of choose, this is the thinking part as a practitioner, what things are relevant to my objectives. Alex, anything to add there? You're on mute.
I think tailoring the monitoring to the objectives and things you're trying to find out is important. But I will say, like, without pre-fire baselines, it is, you're measuring different circumstances. So it's kind of difficult. Like, for example, I tried to quantify the amount of sediment that was dumped in after a fire, and we had a big pre-fire data set of really fine resolution topography taken from ground-based surveys. And those ground-based surveys were all focused around the channel, because for years the channel never moved. And when I got there, the channel spread across the valley. We had no data for over there. So we had a minimum yield, but obviously, if we had anticipated 10 years prior that a big fire would come through. Yeah, I think it's kind of muddy, but I really think like photo monitoring for some of this stuff, especially long term, is some of the most convincing. At least that resonates with me. Not hard data, but.
And Curious is hooked up to Climate Engine. And so if there are big signals, like you just had this narrow ribbon of riparian, and that's often going to be picked up even by Landsat in some of these things. And you can reproduce the past because it's already captured for free. And there's a tool right in Curious to sort of pull some of that. There's also tons of sources of imagery. You can go back and reproduce some of these coarser data sets. If we get too resolved, then yeah, we can get lost in the weeds. Also, just an FYI, we'll go and we'll let people leave at noon Mountain if they need to, but we can continue the discussion for as long as people are interested, but we'll make sure we break there so that there's a chance for folks to leave, and we'll have this recorded and available on the Riverscape Consortium website. Nicole?
Yeah, looks like we've got a question from MB. Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you all for putting this on. This is super exciting to have this tool and to have this conversation going early. So my question is, I'm coming from like a private ecological restoration company. What's the best way to interface with these emergency response teams? So like I reached out to the burn area emergency response team, the bear team, and asked them, hey, is there an opportunity to do like community volunteerism post-fire? And they were like, it's post-fire, you don't have access. So how do we actually, or what do you recommend for actually scaling up this response?
Yeah. You got a little garbled with the connection at the end there, but I think we got the gist of it. And it's a really good question about whether, or not whether, about how do we sort of engage, particularly if you're on sort of private, whether it's consulting side or nonprofit side, with, for example, burned area response teams. There's a few things in the chat I'm seeing too. It's relationships, right? So you've got to start somewhere, and maybe the fire is the opportunity to do that. And I've seen some comments from someone on one of the bear teams that, it may not be approved. Well, we've gotten work done through Bear in some places. And just like low tech, I mean, 10, 15 years ago, anytime you were proposing any of this stuff, people looked at you like you were crazy. We've gotten started in enough places that, people can point, and then it's also become baked into practice. Is this baked into everyday practices on the fireside? No. But we can't wait another year for people to get, comfortable. Like, this is the time to start, and maybe you start and it's smaller and it's only one crew that you can get out, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, establishing those relationships, and then people coming together are often more motivated to make things happen following a fire. The one from Bootleg that we were just doing in that demo, I mean, that was in the middle of COVID, and we were sitting around, and nobody could even travel at that point. And Fish and Wildlife Service had some money, and I was sick of being cooped up, and this place had just, burnt to the ground. We drove out there in late September, had a quick meeting with the landowner and Fish and Wildlife Service. And then, within 2 weeks, we had a plan, we had a design. Within 3 weeks, the Fish and Wildlife Service had pushed that through and gotten most of the permits knocked out. And by November, we were building just before the snow. So there was no precedent there. There was no, examples to look at, et cetera, et cetera. That was just like some of us pushing on this. And now there's been enough of those things that have happened. I think you guys can make it happen. And by putting together things that sort of, formalize this, or if some of you want to collaborate on getting a fire-specific protocol or a more elaborate actual playbook instead of just a bullet list like this, those are the things that sort of burn this into people's, institutional memories, like as, oh yeah, that's a thing, we do that, we know how to do that. And that's what we're trying to excite you guys to do and empower you guys to do.
Looks like that was great, Joe. Looks like we've got a question from Madeline. Do you want to chime in?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'm from doing more stream repair rather than restoration in the southeast. I did a low-tech repair program where we did live staking and coir matting after Hurricane Helene in the Asheville area. And in that area after the flood, the mentality was remove all the woody debris, which is heartbreaking. But as like years happen afterwards and there's still a higher wildfire risk, I've been looking at a lot of these tools as how can we integrate these. I was just curious if y'all have any experience with the permitting process. You kind of spoke to the sentiment of just try to build awareness and point to examples to build support, but just some of the logistical permitting with these techs.
Yeah, I mean, it's stream bed alteration permits. It's going to be whether it's handled by, joint application with state, water engineer, water resources, and Army Corps, or separate applications, the Army Corps. But that's going to be a big one. And, we've been able to lean on the regulators in that context, that, hey, this is a post-fire emergency. If we can't get in there and do some stuff to, much like the argument with burned area emergency response, to protect resources that are at elevated risk post-fire from being damaged. That's that's going to be one. There might be also other state and local regulations that you might have to apply for something. And then those of you that are working with federal agencies or on federal lands, whether or not there's some sort of clearance that kind of lets you slide through with this has already been considered as an adopted practice. And there's, whether it's a CADX or whether there's a full environmental review under NEPA, those will be the sort of pathways that folks will look for. And there are things. Alex, do you want to speak to anything specific in your experience there?
Just in terms of permitting, I think I wrote a message in the chat that it gets easier the more folks are familiar with things. And my partner does a lot of permitting in Central Washington, and they've started basically like a watershed scale permitting process for the low tech stuff, and that might be kind of more of the first of its kind. It's run into some speed bumps, but a lot of the folks administering those permits through USACE and WDFW are much more familiar with it, and it's become faster. So I don't have too much to add, but I will just say sometimes the hardest step is the first couple conversations.
And to the extent things are being driven by federal examples, showing those regulators, examples to get them more comfortable in other jurisdictions, but under the same guidelines certainly helps. Yeah, and the permitting is obviously a different issue than the funding stuff. So we are at noon. Like I said, we'll continue to record, and then if folks want to continue to have this discussion, we can keep it going here. But just for those of you that have to go, thank you so much for your interest and attention, and we'll post the resources and video of this and the slides and stuff on the Riverscape Consortium. So thank you. And thank you, Alex and Nicole, for putting this together. Nicole, you want to go to other questions?
Yeah, and before anybody hops off too, I just want to say thanks to everybody who's putting such great questions in the chat. This is amazing, and I think we all need to read it afterward. And if anybody has questions that we weren't able to answer, reach out with those, and we'll share some answers.
Yeah, maybe what we can do, Nicole, is we can start a thread on one of the forums in one of the sub communities with the questions we didn't get to, and we can answer some of those, and then other people, if they want to chime in and share their experiences, so we can actually use the community platform for that.
Paige, I just saw this question. Yeah, the chat will be available on the recording, which will get sent out after this.
Yeah, the chat and the slides will make all that stuff available.
Should we jump to the next question?
Yeah.
All right, we had some good ones on thoughts on Southwest riparian systems that are tamarisk dominated, or any thoughts on very large floodplains.
Tamarisk is an amazing ecosystem engineer and invasive that builds up floodplains higher and can survive, but also can be pretty dry. So these things can burn. I would say if you were lucky enough to have the tamarisk riparian forest burn, you're going to be left behind with this big probably too high elevated floodplain, almost becoming a functional terrace or inactive floodplain surface that the tamarisk was on. So now you got the vegetation top's gone, but you're still going to have a lot of the roots there. And is there some other structure around that you can get in and try to activate sort of reworking through some of that? It's a challenge, but yeah, I mean, the tamarisk that hasn't burned, using it as structural elements in this post-fire setting, I'd be very careful with, because you're just spreading propagules. If you can get it to sit out and wait too long to dry out and be truly dead, shoving it back in a creek as structure is fine. But you're probably going to need other structure, other material to bring in, and maybe you got PJ removal nearby, or something. But yeah, it's a challenge. Big floodplains, Alex. I mean, beyond just desert Southwest systems. I mean, I know a lot of the examples you're showing are from interior Columbia, which can be similarly dry. Some from more other side of the Cascades, but.
Well, I think it brings to light something that we're struggling with in Washington, which is combating these massive invasive species floodplains that are similar to that, like 1 to 2 kilometer wide sections. And fire or here we're just talking about structure additions, but just a process that Joe lightly touched on, which is incredibly important, is just reestablishing native vegetation. And I personally think wildfire is a really great opportunity to, well, the landscape might be denuded for a moment. And unfortunately, a lot of places that I've worked in have quickly become colonized by invasive species, as it was before. But it also offers that opportunity to reestablish native vegetation. And sometimes in a place like that, that might be a worthy endeavor to go after. So I don't think that gets enough attention in some of these areas, but that's kind of a restorative and preventative measure that might support healthier processes in floodplains that large, because that is, yeah, those are both really tough questions to answer. So.
I'm just wondering, Nicole, we've got a few folks, like it looks like Mary, who's on the DOI burn area emergency response team. I'm not sure if we've got anyone from emergency watershed protection, NRCS, but might be really nice to hear from some of them, both their concerns and or thoughts on some of what we're talking about.
Yeah, great call. Raise your hand if you'd be willing to chime in, and we'll pivot to another question in the meantime. Is there concern with toxicity to fisheries with putting burned trees in the channel?
Well, they're going to go into the channel whether you like it or not, through all sorts of branches going in there. It's not the best answer, but I think single variable management is a dangerous road to go down. So I don't currently know of any, but there's some cool experiments going out there in the post-fire world. I just went to a great conference here in Cle Elum, and there's some folks using and this isn't exactly related, but like fungal treatments to help revitalize soils. And so they'll basically inoculate chainsaws and things like that to, when they're cutting trees, it helps establish some microbe and fungal soil properties. But as for burn severity, there was a paper that came out of a Forest Service ecologist here in Kittitas County. I think it's Eric Merton. And I think the title of the paper was severely burnt wood has little ecological value in streams. So it didn't have an adverse effect from what I remember, but the more severe it is, the more it's just going to break down more rapidly and shatter and whatnot. So I don't know off the top of my head. I don't know. Thoughts?
I think that's good.
Let's pivot to some permitting questions folks have been having. Do these efforts need to go through NEPA? Can they be part of emergency stability efforts? How about the role of Army Corps of Engineers? Thoughts?
Alex, you want to go first, or you want me?
Can
you repeat the question again? Sorry, I was
reading a response. Yeah, I guess just touching on some permitting questions, does NEPA need to be a process to go through? How about federal emergency response? How about the role of Army Corps of Engineers?
So on the NEPA, it's going to vary place by place. I think I saw Alden on earlier. I'm not sure if he's still on here, Shawcross, but with BLM, it's mainly been at the state office level, where various states have been exempting these practices. How that's different in a post-fire context, I think would remain to be seen. But if the low-tech practices are sort of included under a determination under NEPA, then you're in good shape. If you're working with NRCS or the Partners Program in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, they already have their own determinations that these are recognized practices. So in some cases, you could let them be the lead, or let the agency that already has cleared the pathway be the lead. Similarly with Forest Service, it's kind of seems to be region by region level. And I've seen some regions, determine it's a CADX. I've seen others, go through a full review and yeah. So the NEPA is just kind of I would work under the premise that if the practices are included, then you're in good shape. Now, going forward, would it make sense to make sure they're explicitly included in a post-fire context? If there's an opportunity to, sure. Then the rest of the stuff, I mean, when we're talking Army Corps and compliance under Clean Water Act and stream bed alteration permits, that's going to be that same process we referred to earlier. If water rights is an interesting one, that's going to vary state by state. Some states explicitly exempt this sort of work. Some states, for example, Utah, they'll issue if this regional engineer has any concerns or water users have concerns, they will issue a temporary storage right for some of these things. But interestingly, they exempted it with no science or no data, which I was fine with, but for post-fire emergency work. So it's gonna vary state to state on those sorts of things. And it's going to vary too. I mean, you could have the exact same, either gray interpretation of something, or you could have the exact same explicit policy, and whoever is in that regulatory position that you're working with, there's often very different interpretations. So having some patience with them, working with them to build trust, making sure you understand what their concerns are, and also don't provide too much information.
Yeah, don't intimidate yourself.
Yeah, keep it simpler. You can.
Alden, I just allowed you to talk. You can unmute now.
I just added it to the comment section there, but essentially we have a categorical exclusion at BLM for emergency actions, post-fire, post-flood, etc. I believe there's I think it's a 60-day. I'd have to double check the exact time frame, but there is a time frame that you have to do the actions under. And that's probably in most cases the most direct internal process for NEPA. Other states do have, or many states do have, programmatic NEPA as well. That is similarly efficient on the permits, such as nationwide permits. So Army Corps of Engineers, my understanding is we still have to follow the same process. There's no direct mechanism that outs us in an emergency situation, but through consultation and coordination with them, they have their own mechanism which they can grant emergency authorizations. The rest of the permits, as Joe mentioned, are going to be state specific and variable.
That's really helpful clarity, Alden. Thank you.
Thanks, Alden. I guess piggybacking on that one, how do we influence the allowable practices for burned area emergency response and BAR on fed U.S. Forest Service lands to include these treatments implemented by folks who know the rules enough to know when to break them?
Well, we've done our part on influencing by having a crazy webinar. Hopefully some of the people on the call can speak more directly to that are maybe a part of these programs. Alden, you may know of people to highlight here. Kara?
All right. Moving on to the next one.
Wait. It looks like Kara has her hand raised. Maybe we can.
Always had a lot of good things to say.
Oh, sorry to miss that one.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, thank you so much. Also
Awesome.
for all your chats, they're really helpful.
Yeah, I'm the National Post-Fire Program Lead and Assistant Director for Post-Fire Recovery at the Forest Service.
Ooh.
So BAR is fully in support across, I think, all agencies, this type of work. So it really fits into that more first step of recovery phase. The Burned Area Emergency Response Program has a lot more stricter limits to it. It is wildfire suppression funding. So with that, it has a much higher level of scrutiny and process involved in applying bear funding.
So
So we have
bar is burned
area
area.
rehabilitation.
Okay.
So it's basically the bridge program from the emergency programs to the longer term programs. So
Gotcha.
bar fully in support. The bear program, we have to stick to a lot stricter timelines, and it has a lot more scrutiny, because it is that suppression funding, same as putting out the fires. It's that same pot of money we're using for bear. So we have a process that we follow that's very strict to critical values and a risk assessment that allows us to use these funds. These treatments don't typically fit because of that scrutiny and that higher bar that we have to meet for this wildfire suppression funding. So it's basically, from the Forest Service perspective, we're tighter on the funds than DOI, to be honest with you, because our program has had more scrutiny than DOI has. So with that, it's follow the process. If there are things that you're seeing that could potentially fit, work with the regional coordinators or the national coordinators to see if it does, but don't have super high hopes for bear. I'm just going to be very, very honest with that. Don't have really high hopes. That level of scrutiny and the level of kind of hoops you have to jump through in order to get new treatments into bear are very extremely high. So it's not an easy answer, but the bar program, definitely all in.
How quick is the bar? I mean, is it more because like to this point of trying to really get out and take advantage of that first 6 months, is that a time frame that the bar is actually agile enough to? I totally hear what you're saying about the scrutiny.
I mean, it depends. So we'll just go with the it depends answer.
I love that. Okay.
It's the reality. We
Yeah.
have different timelines, and that is a limited set of funds. So it is a competitive funding source, which makes it a little bit more challenging to be super reactive in the funds. But it is funding that is typically available within 6 months to a year of the fire and available for up to 5 years afterwards. So.
Okay. Well, I mean, in the meantime, and you can push back on this. I mean, I would definitely advocate for, if there are conversations to be had, to change the perceived, rigor, et cetera, or things that we can do to make it easier getting through those bigger hoops. Great. Also on there, that it depends cover, the places where we have squeaked through, whether we were supposed to or not. I think are places to start building momentum and setting precedents from. So might be a slower process on that, but we do have to start somewhere. EWP, it's also been a very much it depends, but we've also squeaked through at times there. So we see this a lot. I'm not just talking fire, but in the low tech process based restoration, where when it's new in a locality or in a region, et cetera, then folks, there's often this little kind of like fly under the radar period. And maybe that can happen long enough before people start freaking out that it's like, oh, well, this has gone okay and things. But at some point, things do need to mature to the point of being able to walk through the front door. And those are bigger policy pushes at a national level. But I think there can be the ground up, and then there can be the top down, and hopefully meeting in the middle to affect more meaningful change is where we can end up. Thank you so much, Kara. Other comments or questions?
Question, kind of piggybacking on that. How does fire intensity impact the regulatory and or restoration potential environment for post-fire responses?
I actually just started typing something for that. In my experience, it's pretty hard to live harvest trees on site in implementations without any fire there. People are very attached to their trees, and so a lot of restoration projects are importing wood, bringing it in from some fuels thinning project an hour away, or helicoptering things in, which just drives up costs immensely. And so fire is actually the perfect window to get things locally. That being said, people tend to like to keep the live trees after a wildfire rather than cutting those ones down. So in Joe's demo through Curious, that could be one variable that you're overlaying these different layers of burn severity. Where is it highest? there's your easiest place to acquire wood, which all of these structures, if you're trying to do it at the density necessary to make impactful changes, are very hungry. They need a ton of work, or a ton of wood. And so severity can be pretty linked to restoration potential, just from a wood base. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, that all checks out. If obviously if the burn severity is so high that nothing is left but ashes, or the pieces that are still there are so brittle. I mean, your example that you showed was a piece that still had enough moisture in its core that when you cut it and felled it pretty quickly, that things were good. But if you leave those sorts of pieces for too long, they just turn into fairy dust, right? So, yeah.
Karen, that's wild.
Soon a crew get in a creek on private timberlands when fires are still burning. Karen, are you talking about Kevin? That's got to be a Swifty crew. There must be. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds like him.
She said, "Yeah."
But at the same time, I think one thing that is also important is trying to acknowledge other processes, like trying to do restoration where you might achieve a sustaining processes like beaver establishment. Getting beaver to establish in an ash pit is going to be an uphill battle. But if you can maybe support the areas around a green zone that can make it more stable for a beaver to move in and colonize, the benefits might accrue. So I think you got to look at it from multiple different perspectives and what's the context of that river. So it's not just like, where can I cut down a tree? It's like, it's like that island biogeography. Like, well, can I expand bigger areas to make them home bases for a beaver population? I don't know. I think all that kind of plays into it. So,
absolutely.
So we've got a question about land ownership. Are the sites in the presentation you gave Alex working on public lands or single landowner? How about experience with multiple competing landowners and stakeholders?
I'd say almost all of our projects are linked across multiple different agencies. We work a lot with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Partners for Wildlife, and they work almost explicitly on private lands that are often engaged in some type of CREP program or conservation measures. Doing this work, I think it's important to acknowledge that these streams need space. The other thing with the infrastructure component, that it's very difficult when infrastructure is in the floodplain. Whether you do restoration or not, it is in jeopardy during a large flood event. So the restoration isn't really the problem there. It's something else. For context,
although Alex, you and I were talking earlier about how sometimes the infrastructural constraints on the floodplain post fire are just gone because they've burnt to the ground. So the knee-jerk response is let's rebuild that stupid crap in harm's way again. But that's the right time to have the conversation about whether or not there is a new opportunity. But sorry, I cut you off. Keep going.
No, I mean that's it. I mean, we always try to like leave a buffer. But we haven't really encountered too many issues. So it's surprising, but if you build in high density as well, it actually supports storage and more long-term structure integrity. But
I mean, the more wood you put in, then the transport distances.
I mean, imagine putting one tree in versus 100. What's going to happen?
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't show it in the demo, but we have the planning process that we use, the NRCS conservation planning process, and that is baked into. We got a couple of different protocols for this. You're starting with mapping the existing land uses, existing infrastructure, where are those sorts of constraints, and then seeing how much is left in terms of recovery space. And so that's, you can get some really quick metrics out of that. We have a little planning protocol in Curious. And I mean, these are the sorts of things like Alex suggested, you overlay some of the burn severity, you overlay the Riverscape network and then the ownership, and then you're probably going to find, okay, here's a dozen or so places, and then you can go through and usually in 10-15 minutes kind of get a quick and dirty thing and calculate some metrics, like, okay, what sort of acreages are we looking at, what sort of uplift potentials, et cetera, et cetera. So that stuff can go right along pretty fast.
There was another question kind of linked to this greater discussion too, about just like the stability of structures and whatnot. And while I think that's like really important, just recently there's been a ton of floods, especially in some of these post-fire areas, and stability isn't always the best thing. I've definitely learned, because you can get a structure to stay in place, but you can't always get the river to stay in place. So over stabilizing a certain structure, the river might jump across the valley in a way that you never would have saw coming. And that happened in several locations, just in a bizarre flood event that we had in March in a lot of post-fire areas. So allowing some dynamism is actually advantageous. And yeah, I've seen that happen a couple more times lately, where the stability was held in such high regard that the river just avulsed, and that portion is not part of the restoration area anymore. It's kind of sad in a way, but
That's a great example. A little pivot. Where does groundwater recharge come into this conversation?
I'd say this is a massive opportunity. If conceptually what we're dealing with in a lot of these degraded riverscapes are systems that have way too much inactive floodplain and have channels that are disconnected from those floodplains and degraded. If what we're talking about here is an opportunity to laterally rework and with structure rebuild, and I think this vertical part is really undervalued in some of this stuff, but rebuild these valley bottom deposits not as these well drained, sort of rapid fill of just inorganic material and sediment, but a mix of organic and inorganic material and layers and sheets of carbon fiber. Literally, you are building a much bigger sponge, and spreading flow out to recharge those aquifers and then also hold on to it in shallow groundwater. And it is this reconstruction of the sponge that is the major post-fire restoration opportunity. And we articulate this through Principles of Riverscape Health, a recent Riverscape inundation mapping paper by Karen Bartelt, as the water magic trick, or this sort of principle of hydrologic inefficiency. And so when we have more structure, and when we have a valley bottom sponge that's got more carbon fiber in it, it's got a higher soil moisture holding capacity, we are slowing. It's Brock Dolman's, slow it, spread it, sink it, and then he adds the share it, sort of mentality with the water. And we suck at measuring those processes, but we're very good at measuring the key processes that are dependent on those things happening. So what you see in terms of the expansion of riparian and wetland areas, what you see in terms of the expansion of inundated area and expansion of aquatic habitat, those things can't happen without those other changes, particularly to the groundwater dynamics.
Are there? Oh, sorry, go ahead, Alex.
I was just going to say they're so context specific too. I mean, if you have a clay layer in there, it's completely different than if you're just in basalt. We did one project where it was right after the burn, maybe not as fast as Karen's crew got in there, but activated a side channel and put about 2 CFS in there, and it took 9 days to reconnect with the main channel. And we calculated that at 34 acre feet was stored in the groundwater. So there's massive deficits in some of these degraded areas that haven't had floodplain exchange for decades. And not totally related to fire, but certainly an important point that is hard to measure, but still relevant and can be observed.
Yeah, but once those sponges are filled and you're in a fill and spill situation, it's a lot easier to keep them going with just a trickle.
Joe, are there any opportunities in Curious to integrate groundwater data or infiltration?
Yes. Depends on what's meant by that. If it's meant, add a point and throw in time series, yeah, the inclusion of time series data, more continuous time series, not these sort of snapshots on data capture events, is something that's been talked about and requested. Yeah, if someone's got specific questions or ideas, happy to chat and explain what's possible with protocols and what's not. Probably the easier stuff though is like things that get banked into Climate Engine that are proxies for some of the expansion of groundwater tables and raising of these, where it's like riparian, resilience, riparian indices, et cetera, soil moisture. Those things, if you're impacting these systems at a scale that matters, are going to be picked up in Sentinel and picked up in even Landsat. And those are the sorts of things that you can get for free right out of Climate Engine and bake right into your Curious projects. But if you wanted more detailed stuff, like, yeah, there's games to play. We haven't done a ton of them. I mean, frankly, for all the monitoring wells that we've put in, and they're a total pain in the ass to install, I mean, it doesn't tell you that much that's exciting. It tells you that, oh, the water levels are pretty similar to the water levels in the channel behind the structures. It's like, yeah, well, thank you. That makes sense. If you want containers to do that housekeeping, get in touch and we can talk.
How about, do you know of any modeling or flume studies that have been done for these techniques?
Gosh, what's his name? Remy. I'll pronounce it wrong anyway. Yeah, there's a guy at Grenoble in France who's actually been doing a fair bit on not so much on well, actually, no, that's not true. He is doing beaver dam and BDAs and woody structures and been doing stuff in a flume and trying to simulate some of those effects. I don't know, Alex, you're probably a little closer, having just got through some of your lit review stuff.
I just remember reading a kind of a cool paper about someone who put a bunch of different types of or shapes of wood through a flume and measured how easy it could get down the flume, and like it was as easy as a conclusion you could come to. Like the straight pencils went the furthest and the fastest, and like complex pieces got caught up. All the more reason to think about how you can scale up. Transport thresholds and wildfire settings are certainly a little bit higher. So,
yeah.
Great. I think we've got them all.
Cool.
Can you chime in if we missed your question in the chat?
All right. So just to conclude, we will make the chat available. We'll take some of the questions we didn't get to or might want to be elaborated on. We'll start some little discussion forums on those. We'll have to think about what community is best for that. And we will get a page up that has the slide decks and recording of this stuff. But we'd also encourage you guys to connect with each other and engage with each other through the community platform. And if you've got ideas for other webinars or you want a scheme on how to make some of this stuff happen, we'd love to chat with you.
Hey, it looks like we did miss one on managing workplace safety post-fire.
Yeah, that's a real concern. I mean, there's, especially in higher severity areas, there could just be trees falling all over the place. And I don't feel like we have the time to run through all that right now. But I think just as a bear team comes in and assesses fire severity, you should have an experienced person come in and identify problem trees, different hazards. I mean, sometimes there's like root balls that have been burned down. You can fall through the soil. So yeah, should be taken
Yeah,
seriously.
these also probably are, better for professionals and not necessarily your volunteer opportunities for LTVR.
Yeah, and the hazards also probably some of them at least can get worse the longer you wait too, and more unpredictable. So more rot takes over and whatnot.
We just got a great question from Paige. Any resources for areas of potential high severity fire risk available? It would be great to start pointing projects in those areas, but not sure if this information exists.
I mean, in terms of like Landfire has a few projects or products, I should say, that attempt to look at fire risk and fuel loading. I mean, that was the whole motivation of there. There might be people that are more expert on that. We do have not all, but a number of those layers packaged up in the Riverscape context projects. If anybody is more of a fire expert than certainly than we are on these things and wants to talk about ways that we could package up some stuff. I know there are some other better models and assessments out there. Maybe people could put any of these in the chat, but their coverage in terms of like national coverage is I'm less aware of relative to Landfire. One of the things with Curious is we don't really, I mean, it's completely agnostic. I mean, if you got free national data or you've got really amazing, you got some, really good assessments and stuff, you want to bring things in and bring that in as context. I mean, do it. But yeah, making some of those ones that are at least available for some initial screening and prioritization, that stuff is already, much of those things are in the data exchange, and we do have a screening and prioritization class in the fall.
Well, I
Cool.
just wanted to add too that, it's been really great talking about this stuff, and it's going to be increasingly more relevant as things start to dry up this summer. And yeah, hopefully this community can remain intact and share information. And if people start to figure out the easiest loopholes for permits, don't keep your secrets to yourself. But I think we're in for a pretty serious reckoning in terms of wildfire this season, and I'm glad that this conversation is happening in the stream community.
And Alex, can you just speak to, I mean, the best laid plans, you got if you're in the LTBR business and you've got a bunch of crews and you got a schedule, how often that schedule changes because of fire anyway?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that my colleague and I struggle with every year, that there's all sorts of different windows. We work in the salmon world, so there's windows to work in all these different streams within July 15th to August 15th or whatever that window may be. And that's also the most fire risk time. So I personally would love to see more communication between some of these permitting agencies and practitioners, and find where some of these bottlenecks are, because we get chased out of areas because the fire precaution is so high, and then you can't spend the money for the project in October because that's past the permitting windows. And it seems like a lot of this work is still bogged down by single variable management schemes. And I think the more meetings that we have like this, where we're talking collectively and coming from different perspectives, I think we can recognize different constraints. But yeah, it's a nightmare to plan this year and know all these places. Paige asked where the fire severity is highest. It seems like everywhere I'm working is 10 out of 10. Yeah. So
you can be guaranteed that a crew will be sent somewhere else because some place is burning, right? So
almost, yeah, guaranteed. Yeah.
Well, shall we call it there? And thank you everybody so much for your engagement and interest. This was, Alex and I were just having a conversation like, hey, we should just, do a webinar to, kind of float some of these ideas, before things do catch on fire. Sadly, they will. And yeah, and I mean, really, in the long term, just like getting beaver as a healthy process back on the landscape, getting to the point where fire can be a healthy process on the landscape as opposed to these catastrophes. But in the meantime, there's a little bit of ambulance chasing that's not beneath some of us, at least. So let's go for it. Thank you all.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Reach out if you have questions that come up and we'll get the info out.